me now. Go with me now. I'm gonna take you down. Go with me now. I'm gonna show you how. Go with me now.
All right, welcome to another exciting day in economics. We're going to learn about unemployment today. And to start us off, we just have this question. And the question is, would it pose a problem in our economy if machines replace people? Okay, that's a question to ponder as we go forward today. Alright, so we're going to talk about a couple things. You're going to learn the three types of unemployment, and then we're going to learn to calculate unemployment statistics. So, first of all, I want to make clear a misconception that's out there. A lot of people think that if we have any unemployment, that's a bad thing, and the truth is that's kind of impossible. Okay, so you have to have some unemployment, and the reason you do is the same reason why you can't have a calm ocean. You know how the ocean brings waves in and the currents, and they work to kind of clean the ocean and keep oxygen in it, and you know that churn is actually good. Okay, and the churn of unemployment is actually good for the economy, especially two types of unemployment. The third type, not so much. So here's our three types. Okay, we have frictional unemployment, structural unemployment, and then something called cyclical unemployment. The cyclical one is the one we would say is bad. The other two are a good thing though. Alright, so let's start talking about them. Alright, so frictional unemployment is just referring to the unemployment that exists when people are between jobs. Okay, so it's temporary typically. It's the unemployment of skilled workers that are hireable. Okay, so it happens when you get fired, happens when you quit a job. It could happen when you graduate and finish your education and then go begin looking for a job. It can happen when you lose a seasonal job like construction or lifeguarding. Okay, so this is basically just caused by the time delays in finding the right job that fits your qualifications. Okay, and you can imagine this in practical terms. You know, if you were a business owner, you're not going to hire the first applicant, and as a job seeker, you may not accept the first job that you find. And so that's what we mean by frictional unemployment. And so here's those examples again. You got recent college grads or high school grads, the spouse of a person who might move to a new job, people who just quit or get fired, because that does happen. Okay, it's kind of like dating. You got to find the right person, and you have to find the right job as well. All right, so that's frictional unemployment. Now, let's talk about a little bit of details about frictional unemployment. Number one, typically it's not unemployment that lasts very long. And the length of frictional unemployment has actually decreased over time because of the new technologies in matching jobs with job seekers. Okay. Another thing about frictional unemployment is that sometimes government regulations can impact this. Okay. Sometimes those regulations make it difficult to hire people, and so that length of time between, you know, being unemployed and then finding the new job could take a longer amount of time. Additionally, sometimes if the government gives you money while you're unemployed, it lessens your incentive to go get a job, and that too could lengthen the time that you have frictional unemployment. All right, so that's kind of that's frictional unemployment. Here's what I was talking about with unemployment insurance affecting the unemployment rate. So in the U.S., we typically have an unemployment rate between 4 and 6% when the economy is strong. Okay, when it's weak in a recession, then you'll typically go above that 6% mark. If you look at some European countries, their normal unemployment rate is more like between 8 and 10%. And then when the economy's worse, it would get worse. But the reason is because it takes so much effort and so much expense to fire a worker and to hire a worker. And so businesses in Europe typically will not hire anybody unless they really, really have to. And so they will typically have a higher unemployment rate. Alright, so next let's talk about structural unemployment. Structural unemployment is when, well, it's actually, there's several causes of it, but one of the most recognizable is when a machine replaces a person. Okay? And that happens because of changes in the economy. Okay, if you look at our economy over the years, in the year 1800, most Americans were involved in agriculture, over 90%. And today, there's fewer agriculture jobs because we've replaced those workers with machines. Similar thing has happened in industry. Okay, the height of American manufacturing was probably in the 1950s. And today we have fewer jobs in manufacturing not because of foreign competition so much, but because machines have replaced people. Okay, so that's part of the structural unemployment. So this type of unemployment occurs when the skills that a worker possesses are no longer in demand. Okay, so if your skill is to plug wires into a telephone connection and a machine does that now, then your skill is no longer in demand. Or if your skill was to collect tolls from individuals driving along the tollway and a machine does it now, then your skills are no longer in demand. Alright? Now, what if your skills are just not very technical in nature? Okay, you don't have enough education. So that could cause structural unemployment. Okay, the automation we already talked about. Consumer taste change, an example of this is how consumers today are riding on Ubers more than they are taxis. So that could impact employment in the taxi cab industry. You also do have offshoring of labor. So when we move jobs to China or Mexico, that means that the skills Americans have in those fields are no longer in demand in the United States. And then lastly, the minimum wage. Sometimes that will set somebody's skills at a value that is too high. Okay, and so you can't hire those people because they're not worth what their skills are. Okay, so that's structural unemployment. Now, frictional and structural unemployment are both considered good. Okay, so frictional because you want to make sure people find the jobs that are right for them. So that's why frictional is good. Structural unemployment is good because of this idea of creative destruction. Okay. And let me explain what is meant by that. So this guy, his name is Paul. He's washing dishes. All right. Today he lost his job, and I'm going to tell you why we are glad that he lost his job. Okay. He was replaced with a machine, and the machine is more efficient than Paul. So the machine uses less water, less detergent. It's better for the environment, uses less energy, and it actually does a better job than Paul. So Paul's skills are no longer in demand in the dishwashing job. So if we use our resources correctly and efficiently, we're going to retrain Paul so that Paul can work in a factory or some other job that is more in demand. And so that's why creative destruction is actually a good thing. And so this structural unemployment is a good thing as well. Now, these jobs do not come back. Okay? Paul loses his job, he's not going to get another job in dishwashing. Okay, he's going to have to change his skills. But that's okay because that's how the economy gets better. Okay, if we still had typewriter repairmen instead of computer software designers, I mean, the economy would not be as strong. All right, the third type is cyclical unemployment. This is the bad kind of unemployment. Sometimes it's called real unemployment. Okay, so cyclical unemployment is when you lose your job due to a downturn in the business cycle. Okay, the length of time is unknown, but it's typically during the recession. As soon as the recession's over, these people do get their jobs back. Okay, now the reason this is considered bad unemployment is because it exists when we are no longer using those resources efficiently. So this would be as if we were producing inside the PPC. Okay? So cyclical is referring to the economic downturns in the business cycle. Okay, it's caused by a lack of demand. Typically the jobs in the durable goods fields are going to be affected worse. And that's because people will postpone the purchases of those items, or they'll repair them instead of replacing them. Plus they're really expensive. So I had already mentioned that cyclical unemployment is real unemployment, but we have a term called the real unemployment rate. And the real unemployment rate is referring to the actual rate of unemployment minus 6%. So let's say in our last recession, unemployment reached 12%. Okay? If we subtract 6% from that, our real unemployment during the recession was 6%. And that is the level of cyclical unemployment. Alright, so we've covered our three types of unemployment. Let's see how we've done. Let's pretend that George Costanza quits his job because he hates his boss. What type of unemployment would that be? That is correct. That would be frictional unemployment. Okay? What if George can't find another job in real estate because the market is down? Okay? That means he is facing cyclical unemployment. Okay? Because the market is down. Lastly, George can't get a job running a projector because he doesn't have the skills. That means he has structural unemployment because his skills don't match the job he's looking for. So let's talk about some definitions. We have unemployed workers. Okay, those are workers that who do not have jobs, but they are actively looking for jobs. So that's the key there. You have to be looking for a job to be considered unemployed. All right. An employed worker. The government classifies workers as employed if they are working just 1 hour a week for wages or 15 hours a week and not getting paid. Like if you worked in a family business, for example. Or volunteers, they're considered employed as well. Now the kicker here is that if you just work 1 hour a week for wages, you're considered employed. So keep that in the back of your mind. There's such a thing as a discouraged worker. A discouraged worker is somebody who does not have a job, but they are not looking for one. So contrast that with the unemployed worker. The unemployed worker doesn't have a job, but they're looking. The discouraged worker doesn't have a job, but they're not looking. So there's a difference. Okay. We're going to calculate something called the labor force. This is calculated by taking the number of workers that are unemployed plus the number of workers that are employed. Alright, so that'll be important. Our economy is considered fully employed when we only have between 4 and 6% unemployment, which would include only frictional and structural unemployment, so no cyclical unemployment. The unemployment rate is calculated by taking the number of people that are unemployed by definition, so it does not include discouraged workers, and you divide that by the number of workers in the labor force. And then you multiply that by 100 to turn it into a percent. And then lastly on this slide we have the labor force participation rate. This is the percentage of our working age population that is choosing to be part of the labor force. So you take the number in the labor force and you divide by that number of workers that are of working age, which is typically, we just use 16 and older for that. Okay? And then you multiply it by 100. Alright, a couple more definitions. Alright, the natural rate of unemployment. Okay, this is the unemployment rate that exists in normal times when the economy is strong. That is that number that is between 4 and 6%. The term real unemployment we've already discussed, but that is referring to the unemployment that is cyclical, that is typically above 6%. Okay? And then I already mentioned the working age population, but this is the population in the economy that is over the age of 16, but it does not include those that are institutionalized or in the military. The reason it doesn't include them is because if you're in an institution, that means like prison, you can't be employed. And then the military is not part of our labor force statistics because it would be easy to manipulate the unemployment rate if you just put more people in the military. So we don't include them. All right. So let's calculate some unemployment statistics. Here we have an example where we're going to look at this family and some of their friends, and we're going to determine who in this family is employed, who is unemployed, who's part of the labor force, who's not part of the labor force. All right. So I guess the first thing we'll do is we'll just check the population. Now we're doing that really to illustrate that the actual population is not actually used. So don't consider the unemployment rate to be everybody in the country that doesn't have a job. That's not what it is. Alright, but let's go ahead and calculate. We got Nancy, Brennan, Dale, Robert, there's 4, Denise is 5, and then we got Derek and his family, that's another 4, so 9, and then Randy is 10. So our population's 10. Now let's look at who doesn't have a job. I'm not asking who is unemployed, just who doesn't have a job. Alright? So the ones without jobs are going to be Brennan, Dale. Let's see, Alice is a housewife or homemaker. Tiffany's a little kid, and so is Tommy. So we have 5 people without jobs. Okay? Let's look at the number that are employed. So to be employed, you work for at least 1 hour a week, right? So Nancy is a pharmaceutical salesperson, so she counts. Robert is a doctor. Denise is a therapist. Derek sells helicopters. So let's see, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, and Randy, he helps Derek sell helicopters. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people employed. That kind of makes sense. You got 5 without jobs, you got 5 employed or with jobs. Alright, let's look at the unemployed now. Alright, would you consider Tommy to be unemployed? Or is he allowed to be part of the workforce? Okay, Tommy's not unemployed. Neither is Tiffany, that's his little sister. Alright, Alice. Is Alice unemployed? Is she looking for a job? Or is she choosing to stay home and raise her kids? So I don't think Alice is unemployed. Brennan and Dale, I would count them as unemployed. And the reason I would is because I don't think they really want a job, but Nancy and Robert were making them interview for a job. So I'm going to count them as unemployed because they're seeking a job. Alright, our labor force is the number that are unemployed plus the number that are employed. So we have 7. Alright, and then because we need to calculate the labor force participation rate, we do need to know what the population is above 16. So it's Nancy, Brennan, Dale, Robert, Denise, Alice, Derek, and Randy. So it is 8. Okay? So now let's calculate the unemployment rate and the labor force participation rate. So the unemployment rate is the number unemployed, which is 2, divided by the number in the labor force, which is 7. Okay, and then you have to multiply it by 100 to convert to percent. So let me get out my trusty calculator. 2 divided by 7 times 100. Our unemployment rate in this scenario is 28.57%. Okay? Now let's look at the labor force participation rate. This is the number of people in the labor force, which we calculated as 7, divided by the relevant population. In this case, what we mean by that is the workers above the age of 16. And so we have 8. And then we multiply that by 100, and we're going to get 7 divided by 8 times 100 is 87.5%. So that's how we calculate these employment statistics. First the unemployment rate, and then we calculated the labor force participation rate. Alright, here's another example. Y'all do this one. Okay, we have 142 million people employed, 12 million unemployed. What is the labor force? Okay, then I want you to calculate the unemployment rate and the labor force participation rate. So I'll give you a second. Alright, you're back. Good. So the labor force is just the 142 plus the 12 million, so 154 million is our labor force. Okay? The unemployment rate is going to be 12 divided by the 154 million times 100. So what is that? I think I got 7.79%. Okay? The labor force participation rate is going to be the 154 million that are part of the labor force divided by the relevant population, which is the total population, minus this 90 million that are under 16 or institutionalized or in the military. So we're going to subtract 90 from the total population, so we get 243 million. So the labor force participation rate is 154 divided by 243 times 100, and I got to get out the calculator. 154 divided by 243 equals that times 100. I got 63.37%. Okay? So that's how we calculate the unemployment rate and the labor force participation rate. Here's another example. You do that one on your own. We'll go over it in class. Okay? Now, this labor force participation rate thing is kind of important. Okay, it's not as important to us as the unemployment rate, but it's still important because it's a measure of what's going on in the economy. All right. If you look at this chart here, it's showing that the labor force participation rate has dropped drastically. It's gone down by about 4% over the last 10 years. And one of the reasons for that, or some of the reasons could be you have more people retiring, okay, and then fewer people replacing them in the labor force. That's a possibility. But what the real possibility is that people have decided that the economy is not strong enough for them to get out into the job market. And so that's why this could be a problem. Okay? Here's some trends that you see over time in the labor force participation. You see fewer males and more females joining the labor force. Okay? So let's talk about some shortcomings of the unemployment rate and then we'll be done. All right? One of the biggest shortcomings is that the unemployment rate does not consider the existence of discouraged workers. These are people who don't have a job. They'd probably like one, but they're so discouraged they've given up looking, and therefore we no longer consider them unemployed. Okay? We also have the underemployed workers. Okay? An example of this would be somebody who goes to school, they get a PhD, but they can't get a job in their field, and instead they're working at a restaurant. Okay? That would be an underemployed worker. Or it could be somebody who would prefer full-time work but could only find a part-time job. We count those workers, both of them, as a fully employed worker, and so it kind of underestimates the true unemployment rate. So let's see exactly what would happen if Dale, for example, got discouraged. Okay, so previously in our last example, the unemployment rate for the stepbrothers was, I believe, golly, what was this? 28 point something percent, I think. Yeah, it was 28.57%. But what if Dale gets discouraged? He's no longer considered unemployed, so the number unemployed drops to 1. And then he also drops out of the labor force, so the labor force drops to 6. When that happens, the unemployment rate's going to go down. Okay? Just the existence of the discouraged worker dropped the unemployment rate by 12 percentage points. And some people would look at that and say, oh, good, the economy got better. But did it really get better? It didn't. And so that's one of the shortcomings of the unemployment rate, and we have to consider that. And so we actually do have a secondary measure for unemployment, and it is called the U6 measure. Okay, the official unemployment rate is here. All right. The U6 measure that includes discouraged workers is usually 6 to 10 points higher. And so you could look at that and get a better picture of what unemployment looks like. But we are going to use the official unemployment rate in our class. Anyway, I hope that was helpful, and I'll see you later.